What I encountered on my last RV trip wasn't just an animal. It wasn't a bear, a coyote, or some lost hiker. It was something far older, something that didn't just hunt, but watched and learned and remembered. My name is Chase. To this day, the sound of wind through dense pines can send a jolt of pure, electric dread straight through my core. This happened last spring, a season that was supposed to be about rebirth, but for me became a burial of the person I used to be. My partner, Alex, and I had rented an old, lumbering camper van for a week-long retreat into the heart of the Pacific Northwest. We were graphic designers, drowning in the constant digital noise of the city. The ping of notifications, the glare of screens, the endless hum of urban life. We craved silence so profound it would feel like a physical presence. We wanted the kind of quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat. We found it, and we learned that in that absolute silence, other things become audible too. The RV, a rust-colored relic from the 90s, became our unlikely chariot. It smelled of mildew, stale coffee, and the ghost of 1,000 campfires. The engine complained on inclines, and the cupboards rattled with every bump on the long, winding forestry roads that led us away from civilization. With every mile, the cell service bars on our phones vanished, one by one, until we were greeted by those two hollow words, "No service." We cheered. We felt free. Our destination was a site marked on a poorly scanned PDF map Alex had found on an obscure hiking forum. The post was brief, praising a secret clearing near a nameless creek, far from the official campgrounds. Promised ultimate solitude. The final turn was onto a service road that was little more than two muddy ruts carved between walls of towering Douglas firs and western red cedars. Branches scraped against the sides of the RV like bony fingers. After an hour of painful, creeping progress, the trees suddenly parted. The clearing was breathtaking. A perfect, grassy circle nestled against a steep, fern-covered hillside. A shallow, crystal-clear creek bubbled along one edge. Sunlight, fractured by the canopy, dappled the ground in moving patterns of gold and green. It was idyllic, pristine, and utterly, profoundly isolated. We parked, stepped out, and were swallowed by the quiet. It wasn't peaceful. It was watchful. The air was still and cool. No birds sang. No insects buzzed. It was as if the entire forest had paused to observe our intrusion. We set up a small camp outside, 2 folding chairs, a portable table, a cooler. We laughed, our voices startlingly loud in the vacuum. We built a small, contained fire as dusk painted the sky in shades of violet and charcoal. That's when we heard the first crack. A single, sharp snap of a twig from the tree line, maybe 30 yards to the east. We fell silent, staring into the deepening gloom. "Probably a deer," Alex said, his voice lower now. I nodded, but my eyes kept searching the shadows between the impossibly thick trunks. Nothing moved. The feeling intensified after nightfall. Inside the RV, with the curtains drawn and a single battery-powered lantern casting long, dancing shadows, the sense of exposure was paralyzing. The thin metal walls felt like paper. We were sitting in a lit box in the middle of a vast, dark ocean. We tried to watch a movie on a laptop, but the canned laughter felt alien and wrong. Then we heard it. A slow, deliberate shuffle drag circling the vehicle. It was heavy, paused right outside my window. I held my breath. Alex, his face pale in the blue laptop light, slowly reached over and clicked the movie off. In the new, total silence, the sound was magnified. Shuffle, drag, pause. It was right outside the door. Alex, against my whispered pleas, grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight. With a sudden, brave motion, he yanked the curtain back and flooded the side window with 1,000 lumens of blinding white light. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating swirling motes of dust and moss, and nothing else. The clearing was empty, but the beam caught something on the ground. Fresh, deep impressions in the soft soil. They weren't hoofprints. They were large, indistinct, and disturbingly close. "See? Nothing," Alex said, his voice tighter than he intended. He let the curtain fall back. We didn't speak of it again that night, But we both slept in our clothes, and I kept a hatchet within arm's reach. In the deep woods, every sound is a question, and the dark holds all the answers. We just weren't prepared for the answers we would get. The morning brought a fragile, mist-cloaked normalcy. Golden sunlight filtered through the mist, giving the clearing an ethereal, magical quality. The terrifying sounds of the night felt like a shared dream, a product of overactive imaginations fueled by isolation. We made coffee on the camp stove, the familiar aroma a comforting anchor. It was while gathering more firewood that I saw them. On the smooth, papery bark of a large birch tree at the clearing's edge, a series of marks. They weren't random scratches. They were situated at about 7 feet high, far above where any normal animal would reach. 3 long, parallel vertical gashes, and then a series of shorter, horizontal cuts intersecting them. Below that, a peculiar symbol. A lopsided circle with a line cutting through it, almost like a crude eye or an astronomical sign. The bark was peeled back in wet, fibrous strips. The sap was fresh, oozing and sticky. This was new, very new. "Alex, come look at this," I called, my voice barely a whisper. He studied the marks, his brow furrowed. He reached out a hand but didn't touch them. "Bear?" he offered, but it was a question, not a statement. Maybe a really big one. Standing up? The pattern was too orderly, too intentional. It didn't look like the work of claws searching for insects or marking territory. It looked like notation. I took out my phone and snapped several pictures, the flash illuminating the strange glyph in stark detail. The camera shutter sound was obscenely loud. As I lowered the phone, a visceral, irrational certainty washed over me. Taking the picture was a mistake. We had acknowledged its message. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Why did this pattern, this arbitrary damage on a tree, feel so intensely like it was watching us back? Alex, ever the engineer, the solver of problems, tried to logic it away. Weird fungus pattern? Maybe lightning scar from years ago. But he kept glancing back at the tree as we returned to the RV. The cheerful mood from the morning was gone, replaced by a low-grade, humming anxiety. We spent the day close to camp, skipping the long hike we'd planned. The beautiful clearing now felt less like a sanctuary and more like a bowl, with us at the bottom. The tree line felt like a wall of silent observers. By mid-afternoon, the sky changed. The friendly white clouds curdled into a bruised, purple-gray mass that rolled over the mountain peaks with alarming speed. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in as many minutes. A wind kicked up, whispering through the high branches with a sound like rushing water. Then the whisper became a roar. The storm hit with the force of a physical blow. Rain, cold and hard as nails, lashed the RV. The world outside dissolved into a gray, roaring chaos. We were safe inside our metal shell, but it felt like we were aboard a tiny ship in a hurricane. The vehicle rocked on its suspension. Then the sound I will never forget. Not the thunder, which was immense, but a deep, splintering crack that cut through the storm's din. A sound of something solid and ancient giving way. It was directly above us. There was no time to react. A colossal impact slammed into the front left corner of the RV. The world lurched violently. We were thrown against the cabinets. Glasses shattered in the sink. The front end of the vehicle sank with a groan of tortured metal. The windshield, miraculously, didn't shatter, but a spiderweb of cracks bloomed across it. When the world stopped moving, the only sound was the relentless drumming of rain on the roof. Alex and I stared at each other, wide-eyed, breathing in ragged gasps. "What the hell was that?" he shouted. I crawled to the passenger seat and peered through the cracked glass. The beam of my flashlight, shaking in my hand, revealed a nightmare. The trunk of a massive, rotten pine tree, easily 3 feet thick, lay across the hood. It had crushed the front corner, burying the left tire and headlight. A tangle of wet branches pressed against the windshield like skeletal arms. We weren't just stuck. We were pinned, entombed under a fallen giant. The radio produced only a hiss of static. Our phones, when we dug them out, were now nothing more than useless black bricks. The storm had severed our last, imaginary tether to the world. We were truly, completely alone. The hours that followed were a slow-motion exercise in dread. The storm eventually passed, leaving behind a dripping, crystalline silence. The chill seeped in through the metal skin of the RV. Our propane heater, damaged in the impact, sputtered and died. We layered on every piece of clothing we had, huddling together under a pile of blankets, breathing out plumes of vapor in the beam of our flashlight. The initial shock gave way to a cold, hard assessment of our situation. We had food and water for maybe 3 days, but the RV was our shelter, and it was critically wounded. We tried the engine. It turned over with a weak, sickly whine and died. The fallen tree had damaged something essential. As darkness fell completely, the forest returned to that preternatural silence. No owls, no crickets, not even the drip of water from the leaves. It was a void. We sat in the dark, conserving our flashlight batteries, listening to our own hearts beat. That's when the new sound began. A soft, wet, grinding drag against the metal undercarriage beneath us. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Something was under the RV. Not outside. Underneath. In the space between the axles. My blood turned to ice. Alex gripped my arm, his fingers digging in. "Hello?" he called out, his voice thin and brittle. The dragging stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavier, charged. We waited, not daring to breathe. Then it came, not from below, but seeming to seep up through the very floorboards. A low, guttural, wet vibration. It wasn't a growl. It was an attempt at vocalization. It mimicked the cadence, the rhythm of Alex's hello, but stripped of all language, reduced to a grotesque, bubbling parody of human speech. My mind broke for a second. It was learning. It had heard us talk, and now it was practicing. Pure, primal terror is a paralytic. It locked my joints, froze my lungs. What was out there? The thing from the first night? The thing that made the marks? It wasn't just hunting. It was studying. The next 30 hours blurred into a monochrome nightmare of cold, hunger, and escalating fear. We ate crackers and granola bars, our appetites gone. We spoke in hushed whispers, as if loud voices would attract it. And the sounds continued. The dragging returned, sometimes followed by that awful, mimicked vocalization. Once, in the dead of the second night, we heard a sound like something heavy being slowly, deliberately rolled across the roof. The isolation did its work. It sanded down our nerves, frayed the bonds between us. Alex, the pragmatist, began to crumble. His logical mind couldn't process this, so it turned inward, searching for a pattern, a rule, a deal to be made. He started muttering to himself. "It's curious. It's just curious. It doesn't know what we are." Then later, "It's listening. It wants to communicate." His eyes grew distant. The whispers outside grew clearer. They began to form sounds closer to words. Mangled, wet approximations of "hey, come, see." On the second night, huddled in the bitter cold, it happened. The voice from outside, clearer than ever, whispered a wet, drawn-out syllable that sounded horribly like, "Chaha, my name." It knew my name. It had heard Alex say it. Alex's head snapped towards me in the darkness. I could see the whites of his eyes. "It's you," he whispered. His voice utterly changed. It was flat, empty of the Alex I knew. "It's not curious about us. It's focused on you. It heard me call for you. It wants you." A new, more profound terror seized me. The monster outside was one thing. The monster awakening inside the person I trusted most was another. I tried to reason with him, to reach the man I loved. "Alex, no. That's not, it's the isolation talking. It's trying to confuse us." But he was gone, retreated into a shell of primal survival logic. "If it gets what it wants, maybe it leaves," he said, not looking at me. "Maybe it takes you, and then I can get the radio working, I can get help." Fear doesn't just reveal monsters. It can create them out of the people you trust most. The person beside me was no longer my partner. He was a desperate animal, and I had become a liability. The final unraveling was swift and brutal. It started with a stare that lasted too long. Then accusations hissed in the dark. You led us here with that stupid map. You're the one who wanted to get away from everything. Well, congratulations. The loving partner of 5 years was being overwritten by a stranger fueled by fear and sleeplessness. The entity outside played a horrific soundtrack to our breakdown. It began to tap on the walls. A slow, rhythmic tap-tap-tap from different points, as if encircling us. Then, it would mimic our arguing tones back to us in that wet, guttural gurgle, creating a hellish feedback loop of our own disintegration. The climax came just before dawn on the 3rd day. We were hollow-eyed ghosts, shivering in the cold. Alex had been staring at the locked door handle for an hour. The tapping outside had stopped, replaced by that perfect, waiting silence. "It's waiting for an offering," Alex said, his voice a dry rasp. He looked at me, and there was no recognition in his eyes, only a cold calculation. "It needs to see we're willing to cooperate." I backed away, shaking my head. "Alex, please, don't do this." He stood up, movements stiff and robotic. "It's the only way," he said, as if convincing himself. "It's you or both of us. It's simple." We struggled then. It was a silent, brutal, ugly thing. No shouts, just grunts and the sound of scuffling in the confined space. He was stronger, fueled by a frenzied desperation I couldn't match. He wrestled me to the floor by the door. I clawed at his face, begged, wept. He didn't even flinch. With one final, terrifying surge of strength, he unlocked the door, wrenched it open, and shoved me out into the freezing, pitch-black clearing. The door slammed shut behind me with a final, metallic shriek. I heard the lock engage. The sound was more devastating than any howl from the woods. I lay on the wet, cold ground. The wind knocked out of me, utterly exposed. The forest was a wall of black velvet. I couldn't see my own hands in front of my face. Slowly, trembling violently, I pushed myself to my knees. My breath came in ragged, sobbing gasps that fogged in the air. This was it. I was the offering. Then I saw it. Or rather, I saw a deeper blackness detach itself from the tree line directly opposite the RV. It was tall, its silhouette all wrong, limbs too long, joints bending in impossible places. It didn't walk. It unfolded itself from the shadows and began to move towards me with a jerky, stuttering grace, like a stop-motion monster brought to life. It made no sound on the forest floor. As it came within 20 feet, a sliver of moonlight broke through the clouds and glanced off the RV's cracked windshield, casting a weak, silvered beam across the clearing. The light caught the thing's face. My breath stopped. My heart stopped. The world stopped. For a split second, the pale, distorted visage it wore was mine. My own face, but stretched, blurred at the edges like a reflection in troubled water. The eyes were dark, bottomless pits, but the set of the jaw, the shape of the brow, it was a grotesque charcoal sketch of my features. A twisted, hungry reflection of my own terror, worn like a mask. It wasn't just mimicking sounds. It was mimicking appearance, trying on the shape of what it observed. The horror was so absolute, so universe-shattering, that it bypassed fear entirely and left only a void of pure, incomprehensible negation. I didn't scream. A soundless, animal panic erupted from my core. I scrambled backwards, then turned and ran. I didn't think. I didn't choose a direction. I simply fled, crashing blindly into the wall of the forest. Thorns ripped at my clothes and skin. Branches slapped my face. I fell, picked myself up, and ran again. I ran until a fiery stitch tore through my side and my lungs screamed for air. I collapsed behind the massive, rotting trunk of a fallen hemlock, pressing myself into the damp, pungent earth, trying to become part of the forest floor. I have no idea how long I hid there, shivering, weeping silent tears of absolute shock. I listened for pursuit, for that jerky, silent gait, but heard only my own thunderous pulse and the slow drip of moisture. Dawn eventually came, a gray, sickly light that did nothing to warm me. I was lost, torn, and utterly alone. By some miracle, or perhaps because the entity's interest remained with the RV and the offering it had already received, I was not followed. I wandered for hours directionless, in a state of profound shock. The forest all looked the same, an endless, repeating nightmare of green and brown. I drank muddy water from a stream. I didn't think of Alex. Couldn't. The memory of my own face on that thing was a black hole in my mind, sucking in all other thoughts. Eventually, I stumbled onto a faint, overgrown path that grew more distinct. It led me to a logging road, and by sheer, desperate luck, a park ranger in a green truck was patrolling it. He found me, a wild-eyed, bleeding, mud-caked creature babbling about a thing in the woods and my partner trapped in an RV. He radioed it in. The response was swift and professional, but I saw the doubt in their eyes as they loaded me into the truck. They found the clearing. They found the RV still pinned under the colossal tree. The driver's side door was there, but it was wrong. It wasn't just open. It had been torn clean off its hinges. The metal around the locks and hinges curled outward like the petals of a steel flower, as if something of immense, concentrated force had simply gripped it and pulled. Inside, the RV was a chaos of overturned belongings and shattered dishes. But there was no sign of a struggle with Alex. No blood, no torn clothing, just a profound, echoing absence. His backpack, his jacket, his boots, all still there. It was as if he had been removed from the scene entirely, neatly extracted from his own life. The official report is a masterpiece of plausible conclusions. Male subject, experiencing severe psychological distress due to isolation and trauma from the accident, likely wandered away from the vehicle in a disoriented state. It lists Alex as a missing person, presumed lost in the wilderness. They launched search parties for a week. They found nothing. No tracks, no scraps, no body. The sheriff, a kind man with tired eyes, told me the forest here is vast and unforgiving. It doesn't like to give up its secrets. I know what they all think. They think the stress broke us. They think we had a catastrophic fight. Alex threw me out or I ran, and he later wandered off, succumbing to exposure. They're half right about the fight, but they are wrong about everything else. In the aftermath, I sold everything. The apartment, the furniture, the car that reminded me of our road trips. I moved across the country, but some things you can't sell. You can't auction off the memory of your own face on a monster in the moonlight. You can't delete the sound of a loved one's voice dissolving into predatory calculation. I have nightmares not of the creature, but of the moment inside the RV. The moment Alex's eyes shifted from love to utility. In the dreams, I'm back in the clearing, and the thing from the trees steps forward. But it doesn't wear my face anymore. It wears Alex's, and it speaks with perfect, crystal-clear clarity in his voice, asking me one question over and over: why did you leave me behind? The wilderness holds more than beauty and solitude. It holds pockets of ancient, patient silence. And in that silence, things that have forgotten the sun remember how to watch and learn and mimic. My therapist says it was a trauma-induced hallucination, a shared psychotic break fueled by stress and isolation. She tells me to focus on the real tragedy, the loss of Alex. But I know what I saw. I know what remembered the cadence of our speech, studied the lines of our faces, and accepted the offering it was given. The official story is a comforting fiction. The truth is far colder and lives in the woods. And sometimes, on very still nights, I can't shake the feeling that it's still watching. Not Alex. It remembers me. And memory for a thing like that might just be a form of hunger.